listening to theoutdoorstation.co.uk.
The ability to pass through the countryside with relative ease, but at the same time be part of it, take in the views, and get fit in the process is all contained within the heading of cycle touring. Not a new way to get around or even a new way to take a break, but one which perhaps is gaining interest these days as we become more aware of our carbon footprint and consider possible holiday alternatives. But where do you start, and whose advice should you seek? John Sparks is author of The Lancashire Cycleway, and he is an experienced cycle tourer, writing this book for those who want an easy but stimulating riding route within the flat expanses of Lancashire. A great introduction to the area and the simplicity of cycle touring as a mode of travel.
Cycle touring covers a pretty wide range of experiences. Some of them can be quite extreme, but it also can be a very gentle way of travelling. It's obviously attractive because it's low impact on the environment. That's not just about feeling virtuous, it's about connecting more to the environment you're travelling through. To me it's a wonderful way to travel because you obviously can cover more ground than when walking, see more changes in the landscape and so on. But still you're travelling at a pace which enables you to smell the flowers and see wildlife as you pass and all sorts of things which you normally don't get when you're insulated in a car or a train or whatever. So to me it's one of the great ways to travel.
I mean, certainly this day and age, everybody's concerned about their carbon footprint and so on, and the appeal of cycling, I'm sure, is growing greatly. But to most people, perhaps, that use a bike occasionally, that might think it's a good way to have a break or have a holiday. It might be quite a big step for them to sort of stop cycling to work, should we say, or cycling socially, and actually go on holiday on a bike. Is there a big step to make, do you think?
Well, it can be, but one of the secrets, I think, is not to try and step up too far too soon. So advice would be to start with a fairly short tour. Don't put all your eggs in one basket straight away. Go for a week or even a long weekend. Maybe don't travel to the other side of the world first time, but do something in this country, because there are many wonderful places in this country to go cycle touring. If you're used to riding 20 miles a day, you can do a very good tour and keep your daily distances within that kind of range, maybe increase it gradually as you get fitter. And the other thing is really important, keep your luggage requirements to a minimum. So when you start cycle touring, probably most people would not want to start by lugging tents and sleeping bags and so on. So it's a very good way to get into it is to go using bed and breakfast or that kind of accommodation, so you can keep your luggage requirements down to a minimum. Of course, there are some companies who will carry all your baggage for you anyway on cycle tours, and that's a very good way to start. But if you want to do something off your own bat, it's no problem. You can use bed and breakfast. You only need to carry a couple of changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and credit card, really.
So presumably, although cycle touring has a title, even cycle touring, and there's magazines now that cover the subject, you don't specifically need special equipment for it. I mean, your normal push bike and your normal cycling clothing and so on is pretty well as much as you need, I presume.
I think so. Certainly, if you're starting on the sort of fairly gentle basis that we've just talked about, then yes, there's no need to rush out and invest 1,500 quid on a brand new touring bike, as long as the one you've got is comfortable, is set up right for you, and is properly serviced and reliable. Make sure your tyres aren't bald and so on before you set off, new brake blocks, that kind of thing. But if a bike's in regular use and running reliably, for an easy tour, it should be fine.
It'll do the job, obviously.
Yeah. And the fact is, of course, people will be more comfortable on a bike they're used to than suddenly setting off on something that is unfamiliar.
Completely alien to them. Yeah, definitely. The other thing I think probably people would be concerned about would be their actual fitness level. You said there about if you're used to cycling 20 miles or a time, or a day, or a time, I suppose. I suppose with cycle touring generally, there's no rule that you have to do a massive distance anyway, is there?
No, not at all. And of course, if you're interested not just in packing in the miles but also in seeing the places along the way, then you'll probably stop quite frequently to look round historic sites, or stop and admire the view, go to the pub even, although probably not a good idea to get too heavily into pub sessions in the middle of the day. But obviously if you're keeping the mileage low, then you're not going to be riding all day. It naturally ties in with doing other things along the way as well. And the only really significant thing you have to remember if you're doing that is you probably need to take a very good lock.
Yeah, I suppose that this day and age, sadly,
unfortunate but true. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, indeed. Okay. So you're the author of the Lancashire Cycleway book, which is the comprehensive guide to the Lancashire route. Now tell me about this, because you were saying a few moments ago that it's a nice route for somebody who wants to dip their toes into cycle touring.
Yes, there are a number of reasons why it's a good one for people to start with. The distances between possible stopping places, the distances are always reasonable. There are no massive stages that you have to do in one go. Lots of variety of accommodation to choose from: youth hostels, bed and breakfast, camping barns, all sorts of different options. It's very accessible by public transport, which not only can you get to the start of a loop by that, but also you can break the route into sections. If you're very nervous about it, it's nice to know that you have options for bailing out if things go wrong. And also, we should mention it's a good route. It's probably going to surprise a lot of people how good a route it is for cycling, how scenically diverse Lancashire is.
And well, tell us some of the places that it actually goes through.
Well, the route, we'll just sort of sketch the basics of the route, because it's really a kind of figure of eight, a bit squashed figure of eight. There are two loops which meet at Whalley in the Ribble Valley, and the Ribble Valley is a wonderful part of the world. They're very fond of repeating the story that the Queen once said she'd like to retire there. Now, which apparently is true. It's never been challenged. And a lot of it is a kind of classic English landscape of small fields and hedgerows and stone villages and so on. And it is very, very attractive. But you get variety of high moorland, and also in the west of the county you get sort of very open, flat country. You go through some fine historic towns like Clitheroe and also Lancaster. Lots and lots of variety along the way. So within either of those loops, you won't get bored seeing the same scenery day after day, or even hour after hour. It changes all the time.
Okay. And it's time-wise to do something like this. Is it? Does it absorb an awful lot of time?
Well, the other advantage of the Lancashire Cycleway is, of course, because it's this figure of eight shape, you break it down into two loops, the northern and southern loops, each of which is roughly 130 miles. Some people would do that in a day. A lot of regular cycle tourists might do it over a couple of days. But for people who are inexperienced, it's possible to break that down into 5 or 6 days, so it fits easily into a week's holiday. And there are plenty of public transport options if you need to bail out at some point as well. So in all sorts of ways, it's ideal for the person who's making a tentative start, perhaps, in cycle touring.
And I presume it's a well-known route that they would meet other people perhaps doing the same route as well. Is that well known?
It's not kind of streams of people doing it the whole time, but I think along the way you will meet other cyclists, and there are some well-known sort of cyclist haunt, because cyclists are very, very good at sniffing out good cafes and pubs to a lesser extent, because you tend not to drink masses of alcohol in the middle of the day when you're riding significant distances. But the great cafes are kind of usually a magnet for the cyclists.
Oh, great. Well, we'll come back to the cafes in a while. But what I do want to ask you is it's a lovely book. I mean, it's not a thin book, but it's a very encouraging book as regards the content of it. When you actually approach doing a guidebook, tell me about how you want to capture the ethos of the area or the trip or the route that you're taking and so on, and what you try and put into it.
Any guidebook will sort of tell you where the route goes, and in a way that's almost taken for granted. And of course there are on a thing like the Lancashire Cycleway, there are signs and there are maps as well. So what I think the guidebook needs to do is, first of all, give people a sense of why they want to do it. So you want some inspiration in there, some evocation of what sort of thing you're going to see along the way. And then for people who take the guidebook along when they're actually doing the route, you want to enhance the experience and explain a bit about what you're seeing, and perhaps point out things that people might otherwise miss, that an unremarkable bit of hillside that actually has ancient field patterns on it or something. So to me, it's kind of the thing that sets a good guidebook apart from an average guidebook is, first of all, that inspiration element, and then that enhancing the experience.
I mean, the route, as you say, if you sort of attacked it, wouldn't take that long to do. But how long does it take to actually sort of compile a book like this and dig up all those useful stories and interesting stories about places? And
yes, well, when you're actually writing a book like this, the time you spend on the route is probably a fairly small fraction of the total time that you spend in writing it. You know, you obviously, to me, to some extent, I live in Lancashire anyway, I knew the area quite well, so to some extent I'd done some of that background work, but you have to go and check things, and you have to make sure you know where all the bike shops in the area are, so if people need help, need repairs, they know where to go. You need to check the locations of accommodation. I mean, we don't list, because there is so much accommodation available along this route, we don't list every single place that you can go, but certainly indicate, say that a certain village has the last pub or bed and breakfast for 20 miles. Which is the sort of thing that people very much need to know.
Yeah. Is it something that would be suitable for all ages?
I think you probably wouldn't take the very young children on this. People who cycle with children regularly will know what their children are capable of, or if you're capable of pulling a small child in a trailer up a substantial climb, that sort of thing. I would suggest for people who haven't cycled with children before, probably not starting on something like the Lancashire Cycleway with anyone younger than 10 or 11. Not saying you can't do it with children younger than that, but you probably want to be sure that they're reasonably happy doing day rides first over 20, 25, 30 miles, whatever distance you feel suitable.
I mean, you were saying about there's facilities in case you need to bail out. What sort of time of year is a good time of year to approach it and get the most from it, do you think?
Well, to me, I would think it's perfectly feasible to do it all year round, obviously, as long as there's not deep snow or something, which is increasingly unlikely. But you do have to bear in mind there's a couple of places where you get quite high up on the moors of the Pennines and Forest of Bowland. So you are quite exposed to bad weather, so probably the depths of winter is not the ideal time. I would possibly avoid the height of summer because there's more traffic on the roads and some of the accommodation gets booked up. So for people who've got the freedom to go pick and choose the time, then definitely the spring and autumn would be favoured. And to me, it's at its most beautiful in the autumn.
And the accommodation's still open, of course.
Most of the accommodation would be open all year. It's not an area where things shut down for the winter.
The book, obviously, each section, as you say, each stage has got a profile, a height profile of the route and so on. Is there any particular day which is or area which is the hardest part, as it were, to tackle?
Probably overall the hardest is the section on the northern loop when you cross the Bowland Fells and you go to a height of about 400 metres. And there's between the villages of the last sort of accommodation on the north side of that would be in Ray, and then you've got to get over the hills to Sladeburn. It's not a vast distance, but there's the big climb, and then there's a secondary climb after that. And I have vivid memories of doing particularly the big climb across a greet, and it goes on for a long way fairly steadily and then gets steep right at the end, which is a cruel way for it to do. Cruel way for it to sort of conduct itself, but that's what it does if you're going north to south.
And of course, this once again sort of reminds people that not to take too much stuff with them, because presumably you can attract the wind somewhat.
Keep keep the baggage down to a minimum because it catches the wind, and of course the weight is also an issue. And the other thing is, one thing that if you're used to cycling in maybe in flatter country, you may not have the range of gears that you'd really like for the big climbs like that. And obviously people can get off and push, but that's a lot less satisfying and not so much fun, so it's to be avoided if you can. So the thing that perhaps we should have said people should look at before embarking on it is the range of gears they've got on the bike, which quite often that can be changed without changing the whole bike. You can replace the freewheel and so on, freewheel cassette to get a wider range of gears. So it's not necessarily a case of going out and spending vast amounts of money on a new bike. Just go into a bike shop and ask about it.
But presumably, say modern day bikes in the last sort of 5 or 10 years would have enough gears.
Typically, yes. Yes, I mean, most of the bikes that people would be using regularly, the mountain bikes and hybrids and so on, would certainly have a reasonable range of gears.
Now, you talked about the jewels in the crown. We hinted on it anyway. The coffee houses and the tea rooms and so on. So in this lovely figure of 8 that we've got here, and I've noticed it comes down Morecambe Bay as well. So the views must be magnificent. Tell me some of the cherry spots.
Well, you've just mentioned Morecambe Bay. What's really rather nice is the way doing the loop, as I recommend doing it clockwise. You come across the very flat part of the Fylde in Lancashire, and then you get into the first gentle climbs after that, and then you start getting the views across Morecambe Bay to the Lake District. And I really hope people get a clear day for that section of the ride, because they are stunning views, and you're more or less going straight towards it. And then eventually you turn away and go over some different hills. You don't go into the Lake District, obviously.
So it's nice to tackle that presumably first thing in the morning then.
Well, yeah, that would definitely be a good time for it. Yeah.
And what about coffee spots then? You're keeping very quiet on this one.
Well, I've been kind of thinking in the back of my mind about, is it fair to pick out
one particular place?
In particular?
Well, these things change, of course. But,
they certainly do, yes. And they do change. I suppose one place that I would say is very attractive, which is actually not bang on the route but very close, is in Silverdale, virtually at the most northerly point of the route. And there's a very good coffee house at Wolf House Gallery there, which is worth visiting, and also you can take a very short detour there which takes you right down to the shores of Morecambe Bay.
Oh, nice. Oh, nice. And when you actually finish the circuit as you've described it, is there anywhere to celebrate as such, a sort of something you could have a big slap-up smorgasbord treat for yourself, do you think?
Yes, well, obviously people may start in different places. The kind of official starting point, which is where the two loops meet, is Worley in the Ribble Valley, and there's certainly some good sort of gastro pubs there. But for a lot of people, particularly for people who are just doing the Northern Loop, and I think the Northern Loop has the edge. They're both good, but I think the Northern Loop has the edge overall. A lot of people are actually recommended to start that in Lancaster. And if you start in Lancaster and you finish in Lancaster, there's any number of places to go for a few celebration pints or a really good meal there. It would be a shame to pick just one, but believe me, there's an amazing choice in Lancaster.
It's well catered for, is it? Yeah, excellent. And I suppose the other thing, just finally to conclude on, is presumably a lot of people might consider using the train to get their bikes to the starting point. I take it that it's fairly good access to all the main routes there?
Yes, it's actually very well provided, because the West Coast Main Line comes right through, so there are several points close to the cycle where you can access the Southern Loop from Wigan. You can access the Northern Loop very easily from Lancaster. There's a very short linking passage, but it's only a few miles, and it's virtually all on off-road cycle paths. But there are also branch lines that run through the Lune Valley, the Ribble Valley, and in the Pennines, which give lots more options, and it means people can even break it up into smaller stages if they want to do it the easy way.
That was something I picked up in the back of the book here. You've got it in stages to make the most of the route, but you've also, for those people that perhaps live locally or live near to the area, they're able to actually do day circular routes, which I think is a lovely touch in a guidebook.
Yeah, I'm glad you like that, because It does seem like a fairly simple way of adding a bit of value. And I suppose for people who live locally, it's not only a way of doing the route in pieces, but also it's a way of adding in some other excellent routes, because the Lancashire Cycleway is not the be-all and end-all of cycling in Lancashire. There's a lot of other great roads there as well.
But it's a lovely introduction to the area.
Great introduction, and if you don't know Lancashire, then it's really guaranteed to surprise you.
I was talking with the author John Sparks, and of course this book, which is the first comprehensive guide to the Lancashire Cycleway, gives guidance on how to manage this, as well as a full description of the route, notes on where to find meals and accommodation and so on. Plus there's masses of information about places of interest along the way, and most importantly there's also some very helpful advice on those new to cycling or cycle touring. Certainly the Lancashire Cycleway seems to contain all the key elements for an active break with plenty of reward. It is of course available direct from the Cicerone website and all good outdoor book retailers.
This sponsored programme is produced and hosted by theoutdoorstation.co.uk.